Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin. In this episode 332. I am joined by, I believe it's his second time on this pod. His name is Chuck. That is Chuck from Chucking Darts. You can follow him on Twitter at Chucking Darts. Chuck, how are you doing on this Thursday evening?
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Shwin. I'm doing quite well. Circumstances really came together for this recording. Hopefully, we make it through. There's no guarantee, but one way or another, we get this done. Thank you very much for sending me a message asking me to come on. I'm really excited with you tonight.
Yeah, no, this should be a fun pod. We're gonna dive into what I would call is one of the most I think the kind way to describe it would be ambitious. Others may call it insane. So we'll leave that up to the listeners, but we're going to talk about an article that that Chuck just dropped. But before we get into that, I do have to make a few announcements. The first, picking up the Strickland on Instagram, posting all kinds on there, has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you've not done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That'd be a huge help to us. Strickland also has merchandise, which is available on our website. You can get a Quickland sweatshirt if you want to on there. There's a link right at the top of the website. The website is www.thestrict.land. It's t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it. We've got it. Again, that is available on our website. And then finally, the Strickland has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a star tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, this podcast that I host every Friday with Prez, except when he's being lazy and doesn't come on like tonight. You also get access to the Strickland Mailbag, hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, a.k.a. the Doug Bag, alongside Dallas Amico that comes out every other week. You also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strick and Roll, my solo pod where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. And now you also get access to Strictly NFL, our NFL podcast that is hosted by Constantine and Jeff, who you will be familiar with from all of our post-game shows. And then there are more tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, $100 tier that's going with a variety of additional benefits like listening on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you, and none of this would be possible without BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your number one information source for all your sports wagering info with all the up-to-the-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From week one all the way to the college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use RumbleList to get into the action. Remember to use our promo code BLEAV, B-L-E-A-V, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Chuck, let's get into it. So this is a great thing that you did. First of all, because there's nothing to talk about right now. There's absolutely nothing to talk about. The only things people are talking about on NBA Twitter are hypothetical Portland trades and Dame potentially being somewhere, but then he hasn't been traded yet. There's nothing actually going on. But you did drop this piece, and I wanted to talk to you about it because I think it's really interesting. And we actually did like an exercise earlier this offseason, not certainly nowhere near as in-depth as this. And the criteria was a little bit different, but Chuck ranked the NBA's 100 most promising young players, and the specific criteria is players entering year 3 and earlier. And I believe, just again, cut me off if I'm wrong, this was not a ranking of who is the best today. This is the ranking of who you believe will be the best in their careers. And I thought it was really interesting exercise. I can't say I agreed with everything, but toss it over to you. What inspired you to do this? Like, what did you decide, hey, you know what? This is how I do it. And how did you come up with this criteria of like, because when we kind of did like a draft of like the top 30 guys on their rookie contracts, basically.
Yeah.
Why do you, like, what differentiates for you? Like, what was the reasoning for the 3 years or less, or entering year 3 or younger, basically?
Yeah. So 3 years or less is always the criteria I've used on my show on the Chucking Darts podcast to talk about guys, because after you complete your third year, you're eligible for your extension. And so that's not to say that everybody gets one, but once you get there, I feel like you've reached a certain status in the league. And the league in this, in crafting the CBA has kind of identified that time as we are going to know a little bit about who you are. And so to me, the most interesting stage of a player's career is that embryonic stage right before they are eligible for those extensions, because it's, to me, the greatest inflection point as to where they're going to go. I mean, if you look at really any player, you'll get some exceptions, Laurie Markkinen here or there. But for the most part, if a player is going to be really good, like really, really good, there are signs that they show before year 3. Others, it takes a little bit longer. Others they have the signs, like Jalen Brunson, but maybe they're blocked on their roster for a certain reason and they need a new environment. But if you are watching them, you know that if they get the jump in usage, they're going to be really, really good. So because of that, it's just a tidy way to just be like, all right, before they're eligible for an extension, that's what I wanted to focus on. And as far as why I wanted to do the piece, I think that, in the summer, everyone does a version of ranking players. And this was the only way that I kind of thought that I could do it. Like, it was like either jump in both feet, deep end, or not do it at all. It's the only way that I thought that I could sort of put my own spin on things. And if you've listened to my podcast, you know that I can talk forever. And so I was like, well, what if I just write forever over the summer and see what happens? And I think, in general, ranking players you can get some flack for doing it. You can get sort of clickbait allegations for doing it, because there are a lot of people who don't put thought into it. But I think that if you really want to be serious about your analysis and trying to learn as much as you can about the league, at a certain level, you have to do it. You have to. And I think that whether my rankings are good or bad, I feel as though I learned a lot about what I value in a player and what differentiates good from great players in doing the exercise. Because the NBA ranks teams at the end. It may be one and then everybody else, but that ranking does happen. And I think that teams are constantly evaluating their own players, constantly evaluating players on other teams. And if you're not doing that in some respect, then I think your analysis is incomplete to a certain extent. And so I just wanted to give it a shot, and this is just what came out of it.
Yeah. So, like, what would you say is the hardest part of doing this? Obviously, like, the talent. An example, like when we did this, and first of all, I've like totally stepped back from draft stuff entirely since the 2020 draft. Like, I'm just like, that was the last one I did, and I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm gonna be honest with myself. I did not crunch, like Theo Maladon tape, and maybe I probably shouldn't have ranked him because I did not watch enough of his tape. And so, like, if you're not putting in that time, I think it's kind of stupid to put out a ranking of your own. So I haven't been doing that, but so this summer, me and my other co-host Stacy, we did a draft of like all rookie scale guys in the league. And so the hardest part for me, and this is what I found challenging reading your articles, because I don't have the knowledge of these guys, is like all these rookies, right? Like Osser, Amen, Scoot, like literally all of them, even Wemby. Like, I mean, I'm aware that yes, he's a prodigy, but I have not watched a single Victor Wembanyama game. Like I have not done that. And so the challenging part for me when we did that was I was like I basically only ranked in my ranking, the only rookies I had were Wemby, Scoot, and Ahmed. Like I didn't even rank Brendan Miller because I was like, well, I watched him at fucking summer league and didn't look great, so I don't know. Like, so I'm just not going to rank him. And so like that was the challenging part for me when we did that exercise on our own. It was challenging for me to read this because in my head I'm like, and I get like the exercise is your projection of players long term. And so for me, the challenging thing was almost like Grimes is better than all these guys. Fuck him. Like, but like I'm also like, okay, like I understand that he also does this shit and I don't. So that was like what was interesting for me because I don't know, and you know, I guess the hard part, and you touched on this in the piece, and you just touched on what you're talking about, is like to me, I watch Grimes, and I've seen games where like you know Randall's out, Brunson's out, RJ's out, and all of a sudden it's like okay, well Grimes has to pick up usage, and when he does it, you see the signs of like okay, well like maybe there's more here, and so I can because I'm a Knicks fan because I've watched every single game of his career, watch every single Knicks game, like I probably I definitely have more knowledge of Quentin Grimes in his NBA play than you would, which is totally reasonable. So like, but it's just such a weird exercise because I'm like, well, no, I disagree. I think Grimes can do more. At the same time, I'm like, well, I'd be lying if I said I've watched every fucking Tari Eason game and was like, no, he's not being blocked. Only Quentin Grimes is being blocked from doing things he can do.
Yeah.
But I thought that was like it's very challenging, especially for somebody like me, where like I don't know those young guys, and even look like you mentioned like roles being blocked, and you touched on this actually when you wrote your little part about Cam Whitmore, where it's like, look, I don't know what the hell his role is going to be in Houston this year. Like he could play 5 minutes a game, and there are guys like that, right, in this past class that like didn't play a lot, and I'm like, well, I don't really know what to make of your role, or even like somebody like Shaden Sharp, who you talked about in yours, where like I saw him play a lot. I saw him put up games with like numbers. And then I would like look at the final score and I'm like, okay, well, you put up 25, but your team lost by like 42. So I don't actually know what to make of this. Like, I don't know what to make of what you just performed because that context is so weird. So like, I guess like, how do you parse all that stuff? Because it is really hard to like, this is why NBA teams have armies of scouts and data guys to pour through this. Like how hard was managing all that for you individually? And I guess when you were doing this, did you find yourself going back and watching games over the summer of like various players that you ranked just to kind of like refresh your memory kind of?
So to answer the last part of your question, I didn't go back and like watch full games. I did go back and look at certain guys in isolation, and I wanted to like check a lot of stats because sometimes the stats don't match what's in my mind. But yeah, what you just did is describe like perfectly why doing all this draft evaluation is not for the totally mentally well. Like it takes a little bit of like an insane commitment to really have all this stuff in your head at any one time. But one of the reasons why I like doing it is because if you start and you do it every year and you really feel like whatever the quality of your analysis aside, if you put in the time, then you will have an opinion eventually on like every player in the NBA because you would have covered them from before they got into the NBA. And doing a lot of the draft work, there's hopefully, if I'm doing this right, there's certain patterns that I pick up on that help inform rankings, projections, stuff like that. And the Whitmore thing is a good example because when you look at Cam's age and you look at his ability to like generate steals and blocks in isolation on defense on the wing, and you look at how many threes he was able to get up, like when you compare it historically to other guys with similar profiles who are like blow athletic testing out of the water, the floor starts to rise a little bit. And he has, every player's different. He has his own injury concerns, but I become more comfortable ranking him in a certain space as long as the ranking is a projection. And that you mentioned it, I just want to mention it again. I think I ranked Whitmore ahead of Quentin Grimes. That's not because he's better. Quentin Grimes is much better than Cam Whitmore is right now. But and they're like in the same tier. But point being, I'm just saying that moving forward, I see them occupying a similar role in the NBA, a similar level of value to a given team. And I did mention in like a very short preview article, I used Quentin Grimes as an example, being like, Quentin Grimes is better than Asar Thompson. This is all about where I think they will likely end up. So, but yeah, the usage thing that you mentioned with Grimes is really important, because a lot of figuring this stuff out about, who's gonna make money and what salary bracket and how much value they're ultimately going to return is about stepping away from the prospect in a vacuum and viewing them in the context of their team. Because in draft analysis, when no one's been drafted yet, it's the opposite. It's a lot of evaluating in a vacuum and a lot of being like, well, how many different possibilities does this prospect have in front of them? How many different roads might they take? And one of the interesting things about doing this is that everyone is still so young that there's still that temptation to look at all the different avenues. But at the same time, once you're in an organization, those roads narrow and you have to acknowledge the narrowing of the roads. So like in Grimes's case, I think it hurts him in my silly exercise. I mean, I think I predicted him to like make $20 million a year in his career. He's doing just fine and is going to be great. But it hurts him that the team has found an identity where he is a low usage player, because the team, when teams find a winning formula, they tend to stick with a winning formula. And for whatever
one's coached by Tom Thibodeau.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that whatever we want to say about Tibbs, positive or negative, if something ain't broke, he is not going to fix it. In some cases, if something is broke, he's not necessarily going to fix it.
Alfred Payton, starting point guard.
Yeah. So like, and I don't think I ever write or talk in a term where I'm really trying to like belittle or dismiss any kind of player. But these are realities that you have to incorporate. So it's not me knocking Grimes's theoretical ability if he were to be drafted to whatever team Seattle gets in 2 years. It's more about saying, look, the Knicks are very unlikely to let this guy go because he's very, very important. But he is important for the connector qualities that he has. And the Knicks, specifically, the team where he's going to be and likely where he's going to be extended, unless they make a bad decision, in light of the CBA or in the tax, on that team where I think he's going to stay, this is the role that I see him having. And so, that's where that one specifically comes from. But you do that with everyone else, and it has different effects for different players. For like brand spanking new rookies who haven't played a game in the NBA yet, I think I had a tendency to be a bit more optimistic on some than maybe I should be, because at the end of draft season, I tend to have a little bit more optimism on my top guys. And so I might be looking past some roster realities that await them. So like maybe Bilal Coulibaly, who I ranked, I think 24th, is an example of that, because Bilal's a guy whose shot is still developing. And even though he was taken very high by the Wiz, I think he's the highest drafted player on that team now. He's probably not going to start, and Jordan Poole's going to take a bunch of shots, and they're going to want Kispert and Denny to get an expanded opportunity, and Kuzma's going to be still there taking up a bunch of usage. So maybe in a year after Bilal has averaged, 13 minutes a game as a rookie and been a negative player, I'll feel a lot differently. But for now, I have to rely on my scouting report, my more vacuum oriented scouting report on him because I haven't seen him play, and maybe that nudges him up further than where it should be. But it's all about just sort of dumping all of the knowledge I've been accumulating on these guys since 2021, the draft cycle, and trying to make sense of all of it to learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah, and I think, like, look, I mean, in the Quentin Grimes part, you put he was picked 25th. You said at the time you had him ranked 37th, and funny enough, you had him ranked 37th in this exercise.
Yeah.
So clearly, you're higher on him now than you were at that time. So it's not like you're like it's the thing is, like, our past opinions are always going to serve as an anchor for like where we project forward. But you've clearly moved from a guy that you were like, yeah, he's like a good, take a shot on him late, like a little bit later in the draft, to now where you're like, no, this is like, I mean, I think you said this. I mean, this is what you said about him. He may top out at 15 to 17 points per game, but a selection at pick 25 is an unequivocal home run. You can win a title with Grimes starting at 2, and that's what this category is all about. And like, yeah, I mean, I think Grimes is a very interesting case in the sense of like his entire development path has been so weird, right? Like he is a 5-star recruit, then he goes to Kansas, and then at Kansas he's like supposed to be this point guard, and within 10 games, Bill Self is like, yeah, what if you don't do any of that actually, and maybe what if you leave? Like what if that happens? And he goes to Houston. He totally reinvents his game. He is not he's definitely not a high usage player with the Knicks. And even in Houston, yeah, he was more of a shot creator, but it was very much not like point forward type stuff. And so like he serves an interesting thing. And you noted this again in your blurb on him, is like he still has those kind of like ball distributor tendencies when he drives, almost to a fault, where he like, and teams started picking up on this as the season went on. They're like, okay, he's not actually going to try to finish. He's going to try and dump it to Mitch for like a dunk or something, like, and it's interesting because like his handle, when you watch him, he's really fast. Like he's super fast. I think that's the thing that almost caught me by surprise, but he almost goes like he does not have that change of pace in his game at all yet. There's no in between gears. It's just like 0 to 100 and that's it. There's nothing else there. And the hard thing with projecting him for me is like, okay, yeah, he's 0 to 100 right now. Now, is that because he doesn't have the latitude to kind of like explore those areas of his game? But and I will, like, I've consistently defended Tibbs on this. I think Tibbs is a good development coach. I think his track record with players speaks for itself, and he frustrates the shit out of me with a lot of the stuff he does. I think the last time you came on, I think the first time you came on was actually the night that we did not trade for Donovan Mitchell when he got traded to Cleveland.
Yeah, because he traded. That's right.
And and like I will always say this, like he will frustrate the living hell out of me with stuff he does, but. And he gets the rep as like he doesn't trust young guys. I don't think that's entirely accurate. Like, say whatever you want about him. The guy's had Emmanuel Quickley as a 20-plus minute a night guy in his rotation since his first game in the NBA. And that guy was the 25th pick in the draft. He was starting Quentin Grimes this year, like basically from the start of the season. That was a 25th pick in the draft. Like, I don't think he might not trust young guys in the sense of like, okay, no, but give the ball to Jalen Brunson right now. Give the ball to Julius Randle right now. But I do think he sees value, and I think he understands almost too much. He we talked about his rigidity as a coach. He's like carved out roles for these guys, and he's like, no, I don't care about what you want to do. I don't care that you worked on your tween hezzy in the offseason. Like, you come here and you do these 3 things that I'm telling you to do, and you're going to be good, and we're going to be good. And if we're good, you're going to make a lot of money, and we'll be fine. And it's frustrating. In like, I think this way more with Grimes and somebody like Quickley, who he's afforded a lot of opportunities, quite frankly, to play on ball. RJ, a guy that has definitely had a lot of opportunities to rep out stuff on ball. Grimes is definitely the one guy who you can be like, in terms of perimeter players anyway, where it's like, no, like you are doing this thing. And if you want an example of sometimes where that goes bad, I think a guy like Obi Toppin is a perfect example where like Obi was basically like told like just be a stretch four. I don't want you to do anything else
Mm-hmm.
other than spot up. And obviously that wasn't good for Obi. I'm happy to see him go to Indiana. I think if he's going to be a really successful NBA player, that's a great spot for him. But like I don't know. Grimes is such an interesting case to me because it's like, we have these games at the end of the year, the last few years, where it's like everybody's injured, so he gets these higher usage games, and you see like, okay, well he did go for 37, and he did, wow, he took like 15 threes and he made 8, and you see that ability, but like if you only see that for 3 or 4 games a year, it's hard to make long-term projections about it. And why, like, well, my optimist Knicks like hat on, I'm going to be like Chuck ranked Grimes way too low. He's sleeping on his upside. I think, objectively speaking, if you don't see that enough, I think you ranked him fairly. And I think like, you nailed what I think is, maybe there's more there, but 100% for sure what we can say about Quentin Grimes is he can be a starting two guard on a highly competitive, a contending team. And like you, I mean, you mentioned this earlier in the pod here, is like, some of these younger guys like in Osser or Amen or Scoot or wherever, where you're like, you're more bullish right now in terms of what their long-term ceiling is. In a year from now, you might sit here and be like, well, man, I knew Osser couldn't shoot, but Jesus, like he really cannot shoot. And he's playing this role of like, a wing and off ball, and that can totally change your opinion. And so like and like, look, we've all changed our opinions about guys. Like I thought 2 years ago, if you told me RJ Barrett wasn't going to be a perennial all-star, I was going to be like, well, you don't fucking matter to me. Like, screw you. But like, I think RJ can still be, and I think he still will be a really good player. But like, do I think he's going to be a perennial all-star moving forward? No, I don't. And so like, you have to adjust evals as you go along. But I think it's a cool exercise because of that. Like I mean, this is the reality is a lot of those guys that are rookies. I mean, you ranked a lot of. I think quite a bit of this past year's rookie class. Like you had Derek Lively at 32, Jarris Walker 30, and so on and so forth. Like a lot of these guys you have ranked really high. And I would be shocked if like when you do this exercise in a year or 2 years from now, a bunch of them that you were super high on, just, I'm not saying they're going to bust, but they'll probably be lower down the board. Like they'll be at like 50, 55, 60. It's just the nature of like doing it. And we all do this. This is why there's like, draft picks are viewed as like, it's like the car analogy, right? As soon as you drive it off the lot, once the seventh pick is so amazing. But once the seventh pick becomes like, Frank Ntilikina, now it has a different value. So, yeah, I think it's like, I enjoyed this exercise a lot. Again, I disagree with a lot of stuff, which I'm sure anybody that goes through this list will. But it's like a very forthright exercise, and I did appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think like first of all, when you say ranked him super high, ranked him 30th out of 100, obviously
Right.
with the math, you take the ranking, you divide it by 3, and that's your average draft ranking. So the tier that Grimes was in, along with Lively and Jarris Walker and these other guys, were basically picks that are mid to late lottery. Like I think 9 to 13 is how it broke down. So somewhere between the 9th and 13th pick is the value I expect Grimes to produce. When you view him in light of this year's rookie class, with my personal rankings, which more or less have held up. They changed a little bit with Summer League, but they're basically stable. I view him as going to provide more value than Anthony Black, who was taken 6th overall by the Magic, because I have issues with Anthony's game, and I would rather have Grimes. I viewed him as essentially
I also don't like that landing
equivalent.
spot for Anthony Black.
Well, I agree, but I also think that. So this is a perfect thing with usage. If you don't shoot well, and Anthony doesn't shoot well, and probably never will shoot well, then you need to be so special athletically, like Asar is, or like Amen is, or like Koulibaly is, in order to carve out a really good and positive role. And if you aren't, if you are, I'll say Anthony is like a good athlete, but I don't think he's a great one. He's very smart, but he's not like the size of a Josh Giddey or a Scotty Barnes. Like, you need to have so much going in your favor if you're going to be a minus shooter